I got lots of conflicting opinions about this book before I decided to read it. Half people said it was fantasy, half people said it was horror. Me, I got to the Mama Puss chapter and I was like, I don't know what the hell this is. Hey, what's up, bookworms, and welcome to the swan song of Fright Fest 2020. Today, we are dipping into the 1987 dark fantasy novel by Mr. Clive Barker, Weaveworld. Like I said, 1987, guys. If you want to know about why I decided to pick up some Clive Barker, I talked about it in depth there. Here's the thing with this is I had two books by Clive Barker. I had Weaveworld and I had a Magica, and I put it up to a viewer poll on which ones they would like me to read for Fright Fest, and Weaveworld won basically 2-1. And then everybody told me, well, that's not actually horror. So I was like, well, you guys just really killed my plans. But here's the thing about this. This is listed as dark fantasy. A lot of people try to call it fantasy horror. Now, what does it really actually fall under? Well, we're going to get into it. Like I said, this is my first Clive Barker novel. I read Hellbound Hearts after I saw the movie as a teenager. Of course, everybody was influenced by that. But I don't really call that a novel because that really is just like a cup of coffee length kind of book there. So this was my first foray into his writing style, his whole imagination, and it was quite a ride. I'll just go ahead and say that. Supposed to be, like I said, my new horror book for October. I guess I did this and I did The Hunger by Almakatsu. That one was very much horror. This one, it's a little bit of a mixed bag. But let's do it like we always do, the standard review format. Let's talk about what is it about. Now, Weaveworld tells the story of a rug into which a world has been woven. Now, it is the world of the seer kind, a people more ancient than man who possess raptures. And raptures are the power to make magic. In the last century, they were hunted down by an unspeakable horror known as the Scourge and threatened with annihilation. Now, they worked their strongest raptures to weave themselves and their culture into the rug for safekeeping. Since then, the rug has been guarded by human caretakers. The last of the caretakers has recently died. Vying for the possession of the rug is the granddaughter of the last caretaker, a pigeon-raising clerk who finds the world he's always dreamed of, an exiled seer-kind witch intent on destroying her race even if it means calling back the Scourge, and a salesman who will sell the Weaveworld to the highest bidder, and that leads us into 1987's Weaveworld. Alright guys, well, here's the thing about this book is no matter what you're expecting, I think you're going to get something a little different. Because I would have never really imagined where Mr. Barker would take this story when I first started it. And that leads me into the good. And I think the biggest thing here, and what makes it good or bad, I'm sorry, I forgot that part. I think the best part of this book is seeing Clive Barker's prose, his writing style. I've said recently a lot, I don't go into prose a lot on this channel. I'm not that channel. I like to talk about what makes the book great, not talk about, hey, it's the writing style, anything like that. But it's hard to not talk about with this book because his writing style is absolutely magnificent and mesmerizing. I had no idea the level of talent he had as a writer, as a wordsmith. I did not know this. You know, he's always compared in the States a lot. You always hear him mentioned in the same breath with Stephen King. I got a lot of pushback in that video saying he's more like James Herbert, which I actually haven't read, so I can't really make a comparison there. So when I went into this, I was expecting to feel like, okay, this is just going to be like more Stephen King-ish kind of stuff. And it is nothing like King. Nothing at all. So if you're a big Stephen King guy like I am, don't go into this expecting a Stephen King style. And that's not necessarily a good or a bad thing. He is just a very different writer than Mr. King is. So that really surprised me with that, but he's absolutely wonderful. I mean, the way that he describes every little detail is just, honestly, it's kind of magical. And I didn't expect that going into this. So that's definitely the biggest plus of this book is just seeing how wonderful of a writer he actually is. Not quite to like the way of like a Ray Bradbury where I say he'd be describing, something absolutely horrifying, but his prose would make it sound beautiful. No, this is just the way how descriptive he is in building this universe is just, it's like Robert Jordan level of like, wow, that's really, really a fine point there that you're making. So I did not expect that going into this book. And I think that it was just the beginning of things that I didn't expect. Like just his sheer imagination that he puts in this book. It says an epic adventure of the imagination. The imagination on Mr. Barker is wild because the whole fugue is just completely out of nowhere, just massive in scope. And I didn't really expect. I mean, just like the idea of, okay, there's like this universe inside a rug. Okay, that's kind of weird. But it goes from being like weird to being like, man, this guy really either was taking some really good hits of acid or he just had a wild imagination. And it really makes me think, it feels very Dark Tower-ish. If you're into Dark Tower by Stephen King, I think this feels very Dark Tower, except like in reverse order, where Dark Tower, you start in that fictional world and you get pulled into our world, and this one kind of starts in our world, and then you get pulled into this fictional world, and it's just every bit as massive in scope as Dark Tower is. It might not be exactly the same. Obviously, these are very different universes, so I wouldn't say that. But I'd say someone who's a Dark Tower fan is probably going to find lots of similarities here, and that's always going to be a plus in my book. Now, look, the horror is very light. It's there. But it's more, and this is what I knew about Clive Barker. I knew he was more into the creatures than a Mr. King is. I knew he was very much more into like the creepy crawlies, as I like to call them. But his monsters in this are very horrifying. Mama Puss, which I kind of talked about earlier, the sisters. Just there's a lot of things that I don't want to get into details. They're just like, what the hell are you thinking here? So it has the horrific body horror kind of moments and things like rape, being raped by monsters that will actually kind of be like, that's pretty horrific. But again, I'd put the horror rating on this very low. I don't think I did really do a fear factor rating for this. It'd be low because it isn't a scary book like at all. It just has some stuff that's more like, man, it's kind of fucked up. It's kind of where you would think. But again, I will state that the creatures are just very, very interesting and very horrifying. But again, it's just such a lighter part of the book. Then you have Uriel, which isn't really as much, I think it would be as horrifying. It's just like mesmerizing, I think. So, if you're going into this expecting horror, I think you might actually be a little disappointed with it. I wasn't, because I had those warnings that it probably wasn't going to feel like it was a horror book, that I wouldn't really go that far. But the creatures are very cool. I want to say that Immaculata, Hobart, and Shadwell. I always want to say Shagwell because he shags well. Anyway, Shadwell. I think they're very good villains. I really liked them quite a bit. They are three very different villains. One is just like your standard overly racist cop in that time period, and another is just a straight black magic witch. And the other one's just sleazy scumbag, would sell his mama for a nickel type. So three very different kind of villains in there. And then you have Uriel, which is just something completely different. I'll wait and let you decide that on your own. But I like those villains a lot. I think that was actually something that was really well done in this. And I didn't expect that. I mean, I thought maybe we'd have one big bad. I didn't expect to have like numerous big bads, and then we have Mama Puss and things like that. So lots of interesting characters, huge world. You're going to need like a spreadsheet to kind of keep some of these terms and stuff because it uses a lot of terminology. I think you not really a spreadsheet, but you might want to just make you a list real fast of like what some of these words mean until you get used to them. Depends on you, really. But there are a couple of bad things here. And I think the biggest bad thing is I don't think Calhoun or Suzanne are very memorable protagonists. They're very vanilla. There really is never any moment where I'm really resonating with them, where I really feel like I care about either of them. And I think that is one of the big breakdowns, what differentiates what I like about King versus his writing is I always feel like with King, he gives his characters enough development in his stories that I really care about them by the end of it. I felt like either one of them could have died somewhere in this book and it wouldn't have affected me either way. They were very generic and very, very carbon copy, just cookie cutter, like something you've seen a million times. And I felt like maybe they could have used some better development or something to make them a little more than, I don't know. She has like big breakout moments and stuff like that. Don't get me wrong, guys. I just never really gravitated towards either of those characters. So I think your mileage is going to vary on that one. It's going to depend on how you feel about it. I don't know. I didn't really ever get anything out of either of them. And I will say, like, the middle of this book really drags. The setup is really good once they get inside of Weaveworld. It's inside of the Weaveworld, inside of the Fugue. It's really good stuff. And then it just hits a wall for a while. And here's the thing is like his writing style is so crisp. I never felt like it was a sludge to get through it, but it was a point where I was like, I feel like I've read like 100 pages and nothing's happened. And I feel like a lot of people are going to hit that same wall, but the last act is just fire. It's great. So it could have been a little bit shorter, I think. It could have been tied up a little bit, but he was building his world so much. I think like a Wheel of Time reader will probably love it because the way that he builds his world in the middle of it really does give it some depth and some scope. But yeah, it could have been shortened a little bit for me. But let me get into why you should read it here, guys. I think if you need a break from your standard medieval swords and shields kind of fantasy, this is the kind of fantasy I think that you would like. It's more of like, not really, this seems like an odd comparison. I'm not really saying it's like Dresden Files, because there's nothing like Dresden Files, don't get me wrong, but I'm saying it's more of that urban fantasy style that you would be looking for, just with a little bit more of darkness in it. So the dark fantasy tag is very, very apt. His talent as a writer is something special, and I did not, it's just like one of those things I never heard about him. I heard about how he's just such a horror master, and things like that, so I just never heard very much about his writing style, and I think it just really, really caught me off guard. So if that's something you can appreciate, and I think just about any reader can, you're going to have plenty to like here. And say you finish Dark Tower, you're looking for something similar. I'm not going to put this. I mean, Dark Tower is one of my favorite fantasy series ever, so I'm not going to go and say it's as good as Dark Tower. But I feel like it's in that same type of imagination needed to grasp something like a Dark Tower, where it's merging together several different kind of genres and just a massive, massive world there. If I have some final thoughts, guys, like this book just is not what I was expecting at all. I do wish it would have been a little more horror than dark fantasy. I don't know. I've heard all these years about Clive Barker just being like one of the scariest writers out there. So I guess I was just itching because of the season that I really wanted something scary. So, and not that I regret reading it or anything. I just wish for, Fright Fest. I was ending Fright Fest here on Halloween Day. I was ending this with something a little more horrifying to talk about. But I'm very much looking forward to reading some of his horror stuff. I think Magica also kind of falls under his fantasy stuff, but I did get the Damnation Game. I've got Cabal, I've got Books of Blood, and Books of the Art on my Kindle. And so I think I'll be doing Books of Blood sometime next year, without a doubt, and then kind of see where I go from there. But his writing style alone is reason enough for me to want to continue to read his stuff. And I want to see that writing style applied to something that is just a truly horrific story, and I think then it'll be kind of a marriage that I will be very much a very willing partner to. So guys, have you read Weaveworld? I know some people on the channel were reading it at the same time, but it seemed like the participation really dwindled, so I'm not sure how many people actually finished the book. But if you've read Weaveworld and you want to talk about it, drop in the comments, let me know what you think, and you guys have yourselves a very safe and happy Halloween.